take one of hopefully one. Good morning and welcome to Walking the Way Book Club. We're still in Chapter 2. We'll be tackling question 5, which is explore the role feelings play in our current social and personal lives, in media and popular arts, and church activities. Would you say that you were sometimes, never, always controlled by your feelings? So with that, I think I'm just going to share the quote that stood out to me in this section, which is in the subsection of Brief Initial Survey of the 6 Human Dimensions, under the titling Feeling. In the ruined soul, the mind becomes a fearful wilderness and a wild intermixture of thought and feeling, manifested in willful stupidities, blatant inconsistencies and confusions, often to the point of obsession, madness, or possession. And I think that confusion is a good place to start with this question, because we often mistake feelings for thoughts and vice versa. For example, most of the time when we judge a thing, we think we think that we are forming a rational opinion about that thing, when what's actually happening is we have some inclination towards or away from that thing, that object of our judgment, and the degree to which we are just indicates the degree to which our response to that stimulus, whatever happens to be before our minds or our eyes or whatever, we have some kind of feeling about it, and the more just we are, the more appropriate our feeling towards that thing is. So for example, silly, but I think it gets the point across. A cute puppy, you should think that a cute puppy is cute. If you do not think that the puppy is cute, that's unjust. Your feelings are miscalibrated, I think it would be a good word to say. On the other side of the spectrum of feelings being appropriate, it's like a poor person on the side of the road. And there's nuance here, but you see someone that's destitute and you're not moved to compassion for that person, that's unjust. And that's the justice governs the feeling dimension of the person, and it's almost thoughtless. And what we think of as judgment, of the thinking, the rational argument that we construct in our minds, is actually an attempt to justify the feelings that we've already had about the thing that we have cast judgment upon, or to justify our sense of justice as being appropriate. And we do this all the time. Our tastes in any kind of media, our preferences for romantic partners, our inclination or disinclination to befriend or interact with at all people that we see around us in day-to-day life. That sort of rational aspect is just us trying to convince ourselves that the way we already feel about that thing is correct. And so very clear that in that sort of confusion, it becomes very easy to get off track without even knowing it. And that results in the second part of that quote, the willful stupidities and blatant inconsistencies that we just justify away in order to convince ourselves that the response that we've had, which is natural to us, is an appropriate one. And upon that false or faulty assumption of our own propriety, purely rational thought, just logical argument can go anywhere. It is good argumentation is wholly dependent upon the assumptions upon which it's based. And without a good assumption, you can go a really, really bad place really fast and have no idea that you've done so.
Yeah, I was just scrolling through and making sure that this question doesn't come up. I think later in the book, think the way I answered it the first time we were going through it was explore the role feelings play in our social and personal lives. So for me, that the feeling for me that that I thought causes us to act was was suffering, right?
Yeah.
And to 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 see another person suffering, like it causes us just innately to want to help them, and
Yeah, I think in the well-ordered heart, that is true.
sure,
In perhaps most, that is not. That is, I think that is a gift of grace, that the heart can be so moved to compassion in the face of suffering. I would agree, though, that suffering is the most motive force in human action, whether it usually to alleviate one's own suffering or perceived suffering. We do almost everything to avoid pain rather than, say, face it head on,
sure.
except that difficulty is part of the process, because pain it's unavoidable. Your choices are either to seek it out in ways that are honoring to God and productive towards his ends, or to flee from it as long as you can and fail,
So
and be totally unequipped for the struggle when it comes. So you can either choose to have suffering and be ready for more of it on the front end, or be totally unprepared for it when it comes later on. And I think that this is one of, not perhaps the most obvious example of seeking suffering, seeking it out so that we can be equipped for greater suffering when it comes. Because this has been and will continue to be an enormously painful process of finding the parts of us that are dead, acknowledging their deadness, and crucifying them. It is every bit as painful as it sounds.
so when it says, are you controlled by your feelings? I'd say yes.
Yes, definitely.
Um, especially this feeling of,
Of trying to avoid suffering.
seeing like seeing Jesus die on the cross, and like more fully conceptualizing what.
And identifying with it.
Sure. Yeah. Picking up our own cross.
Yeah. So yeah,
follow
I am a follower. I am a little Christ. I walk where he walked, no matter the pain or the difficulty, the suffering that's involved. I have the courage to follow his lead, and it is a courageous thing to seek the death of that which is already dead in us, so that we can participate in new creation. And I am going to pull up that Chesterton quote because it's a banger.
So it's really the fact that Jesus did die on the cross doesn't care about my feelings, but actually
It redeems them
really cares about my feelings, and the
Yeah.
fact that
so much so that, like, he died so that they could be right, that we could be just as he is just.
exactly.
As promised, the Chesterton quote on courage, which I absolutely love. He says, "Take the case of courage. No quality has ever so much addled the brains and tangled the definitions of merely rational sages. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of a readiness to die. He that will lose his life, the same shall save it. It's not a piece of mysticism for saints and heroes. It's a piece of everyday advice for sailors or mountaineers. It might be printed in an Alpine guide or a drill book. This paradox is the whole principle of courage, even of quite earthly or brutal courage. A man cut off by the sea may save his life if he will risk it on the precipice. He can only get away from death by continually stepping within an inch of it. A soldier surrounded by enemies, if he is to cut his way out, needs to combine a strong desire for living with a strange carelessness about dying. He must not merely cling to life, for then he will be a coward and will not escape. He must not merely wait for death, for then he will be a suicide and will not escape. He must seek his life in a spirit of furious indifference to it. He must desire life like water, yet drink death like wine. And I think that definition of courage, and combined with what we've been talking about with the office of feeling, makes a really poignant point about the degree to which feeling does control us, and how, in order for us to live a life like that of courage, it requires the death of certain feelings so that new feelings can take their place. For example, fear must give way to hope in order for us to act courageously. You can't just be afraid, and the way that you display courage, because courage isn't really a feeling, it's a virtue, which is inspired by other feelings. For example, hope and optimism. Like, a person can't act courageously if he does not have hope that he can affect his own future in a way that he desires, and he can't have a desire about being able to affect his future unless he thinks that there is a good outcome to be pursued. And so these feelings associated with hope and with optimism are absolutely necessary for the action of courage to take place. And both of those things require that death come to fear. Like, fear be crucified in order to even have those ideas about a good future, or have hope in one's ability to affect that change. And so it's not so much a game of not ever being controlled by feelings, but being controlled by feelings that are good, honorable, and pursuant to God's purposes, which, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but those feelings are love, joy, and peace. So peace really is that optimism aspect. Right standing with God, especially, and with each other, is the good outcome that we're after. To be able to relate rightly in a way that is just and good and acceptable and perfect with each other and with God and with ourselves even. That's the vision we're driving at here. And without a very clear picture of that and a belief that that outcome is possible, you can't act on it. It's just not possible. Unless you really believe that that promise is secure, you just won't ever be motivated. On the front end, you won't ever be motivated to act as if it is true. And when suffering comes, and inevitably will come, you can't act courageously in the face of that fear and that suffering, because you don't believe that the good outcome is real or possible or actual. So of course you're not going to be hopeful that the actions you take, courageous or not, can actually produce the outcome you desire.
I think just like you were saying, with love, joy, and peace, all of those things are the life that Jesus,
those characterize the God life.
Bring. And so when we see suffering, we see the absence of life, and for me that moves me to wanting to care and care for whatever is going through that absence of life, and that is the life, of course, that we're called to, and that we hear in the gospel, that is the evangelion, that life is so much
that
better.
Good news is the good outcome.
Truly,
that we hope for, and I think that ties into the part of the question about church life specifically, is the church properly understood does that. Sees suffering, sees anti-life, sees death, suffering, and appropriately, like, the feeling is charity in response to suffering. To bring life into death is the incarnational work of God that he has been doing since the beginning and will continue to do until history is over. And the degree to which we participate in that act of God, which is singular and somehow new and fresh every time, is the degree to which we actually live up to the title that we claim of Christian. And it is deeply unfortunate that that very rarely happens in the church at large. I have lately experienced more of that in this season of post-divorce, of trusting that God's people will display his character, and that actually happening, despite my significant reservations that it would not. I think that's been one of the biggest growth vectors for me, is learning how to be with God by being with his people in a real way, rather than just hey, how can I help you with your worldly problems, because I got solutions for days for worldly problems. But that's just seeking life in all the wrong places. And I had to be disabused of that misapprehension, quite brutally, as the case may be. But as God promised way back, the restoration will be better than I could have imagined beforehand. And it's been true. That's true.
Amen.
Well, I hope this has been informative for you. I hope we've answered the question about the role feelings play in our lives, our social context, and our relationships within the church, and the relationship they have to how we move throughout our lives. And hope this has been a blessing to you, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Walk in the Way Book Club. Please like, comment, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content. We can't wait to see you in the next one. God bless.